Okay, so let's start digging into career theory. And in chapter 7, we're going to talk about the Holland theory of personalities and environments. So, John Holland developed the theory of vocational personality and work environments, which definitely just rolls off the tongue. It evolved from the idea of the trait and factor theory. And trait and factor theory was very much about matching individual people to a career path. Developed largely from veterans coming back from war and needing something to do when they transitioned out of military service. So Holland picked up this idea of trait and factor and said, there might be a little bit more to this picture because people are unique and individual, and they might be attracted to certain careers because of aspects of their personality. And so it's really important for us to take time to look at that aspect of the being and take a more holistic view of things as opposed to just matching someone up to a career option and that being the end of the process. So Holland further developed this idea of choice being an expression of your sense of personality within the broader context of society rather than just let's pick a job. So within the Holland theory, there are some underlying assumptions here. First, there's a question of what characteristics of an individual person leads to them having a positive or a negative outcome in a career field. So going beyond just assigning someone or matching someone up to a career field, it's about understanding what kinds of things are going to lead to that career being a positive experience and a meaningful outcome. Further, we want to consider what characteristics then also contribute to the idea of stability in career across the lifespan. And it's interesting to think about this in a modern context because we're seeing a trend when it comes to career of this idea of changing jobs more often or seeking out opportunities more often. And I think a more traditional approach was this idea of loyalty and longevity to an industry, to a company, and that loyalty was rewarded appropriately. And we're seeing a lot of shifts in industry where that's no longer the case. And so employees are sort of pushing back and saying, well, if this isn't going to work for me, I'm not going to work for you. And so thinking about the Holland context in the modern day is this idea of stability in career as opposed to stability in a job. So again, we really want to separate this idea of a job and a career being more a sense of identity and connection to some sort of broader concept. So you might be able to shift settings, companies, opportunities within a career field across your lifespan. So as we're thinking about this Holland model, we're not thinking about stability in terms of staying in the same job for a very long time. It's more about stability in a career field and connection and trajectory of growth for an individual over the sense of a lifespan in terms of career growth and development. And then that third underlying assumption or question is considering those first two things, what types of supports can be offered to help those seeking career support be able to find positive outcomes and stability? And so from this idea, Holland developed his model. And it's really centered on the RIASEC codes or the RIASEC codes. Depends on who you ask. People pronounce it differently. RIASEC or RIASEC is an acronym to represent 6 personality types and environments that an individual might embody. And we'll break those down in just a moment. But the underlying piece of the theory here is that we're always seeking congruence. So that's that sort of trait and factor matching idea. But we're taking it a step further. And so when there's congruence between your characteristics of yourself and your career fields, then you have those positive outcomes and you have good trajectory and success over a career. So it's not that anyone fits perfectly into one type. There's a more dynamic view of things and a combination of considerations that help describe a person and help us have a more dynamic conversation about career fit. The R in RIASEC stands for realistic. This is the first type under the Holland model. So this realistic type connects mainly with individuals who have that sort of tactile mechanical ability. So they're very kinesthetically oriented and they really like to work with their hands. They like to fix things. They like to fiddle around with machines, take things apart, put them back together, be outside. These are our gardeners, our individuals who really like to be directly involved and hands-on in the work that they do. And that work results in very tangible outcomes. And so for that individual, they can know exactly what they did, they can know exactly what the outcome is, and it's very satisfying for them. They're super practical and they really like to see connection between effort and outcome. And some examples of careers under the realistic type would be mechanics, a lot of medical professionals, firefighters, carpenters, like individuals who really enjoy that hands-on, really direct work. Next is the I, which stands for investigative. These are individuals who really like to analyze, investigate, evaluate. There are problem solvers. So these are individuals who really like to take a problem and then work through and find a solution. So they tend to be pretty self-motivated. They're very abstract thinkers and they really appreciate detail and precision in the work that they do. So again, pulling a lot from the medical fields, also pulling from individuals like, marketing research where we have a problem, we need to figure out how to connect with a population, and so that person can go and figure out the most strategic way to connect. Next, we have artistic, the A. These artistic, it's just what it sounds like. These individuals are innovative. They have a lot of intuition. They really like to be imaginative and creative. So they really appreciate a lot of freedom. They don't like to be micromanaged. They tend to like really independent roles and spaces where there's no consequences for being open and expressing emotion. So thinking about individuals like fashion designers, photographers, writers, journalists, individuals who really appreciate an artistic approach to work. Next, the S is social. Again, what it sounds like, individuals who like to inform, train, help others, very good with communication and words. So these are people persons, and they really like to talk through things to find solutions to problems or to address needs. And there's a lot of kindness, idealism, optimism. This is where we see counselors often show up, but also teachers, librarians, anybody involved in what we would call a helping field, individuals who really like to talk to others, connect, and learn from that experience, and then that directly impacts their work expectations. The E is enterprising. So individuals who really like to be in leadership positions, they like to manage others, they like to be judged by performance. So they really are individuals who like to be in positions to take risks and are very optimistic and energetic in their work. So these are folks like investment bankers, financial planners, accountants, real estate agents. So they really like to see an economic impact to their work, and they work really hard to meet organizational goals. The last one, the C, is conventional. These are individuals who are analyzers. So they like to work with data, they like to work with numbers, they like very simple structured tasks, and they like instructions. So they're very organized and dependable, maybe not as inclined to take a leadership position. So they're very detail and task oriented. These are anything to do with math. So bankers, building inspectors, accountants, analysts of any kind, statisticians, individuals who really appreciate a checklist. So when we talk about the RIASEC codes, these represent individual traits. And what we tend to do is we rank for each individual which have the strongest representation in their personality and interests. So when you see the little 3-letter codes next to these example careers, C, S, and E, for example, for bank teller, they're written in the order that they would show up in the outcome of a Holland-based assessment, which means that they're primarily a conventional type, and then that's followed by social and enterprising, for example. When we put these all together, we create the hexagon model that you might have seen before, and it organizes these different types that might be present within a person's interests. And sometimes we see 2 letters to represent this, sometimes 3, but we're looking at them individually, but also in relationship to each other. So when an individual has congruence, that's when we see match between the person and the environment. So for example, if a social type person was in an accounting role where they have to sit alone by themselves and work with spreadsheets and numbers, they might not have a lot of congruence because they don't get opportunities to get that need met. They might do better in a role that's maybe more conventional, maybe in a space where that's more aligned with their personality type. So like a conventional person would do better in that accounting type role, maybe the social person would do better as a marketing outreach person or an events organizer. So we're looking for congruence. We're looking for match between the person and the environment. We're looking for a match between the thing that leads from this hexagon model and what is represented in the career space. So differentiation is clarity of interests. And so part of that is using assessment to get clear on which personality traits are going to be the most representative of that person. So we're seeking differentiation so that we can match them up in a way of finding that congruence. And then consistency is thinking about the relationship between the types. So looking at like conventional and artistic, which are opposite each other in the model, they're also pretty different versus realistic and conventional, which are next to each other and they're touching because they're somewhat similar. So consistency is similarity of types. If my lead types were a C, an E, and an S, for example, that's pretty consistent because they're very near to each other on the hexagon model. If I was a C, A, R, maybe not so much because conventional and artistic are pretty opposite to each other. And we're looking at the complexity of individuals and looking for congruence. It's not a simple match. Now, some common criticisms here are that this model doesn't necessarily translate across different cultural identities. It's very Western based, and it puts a lot of value in things that are very Western focused, like productivity, like a sense of control. And there's not a lot of evidence research-wise to support the relationship between the types leading to positive outcomes in career. So it's a well-established theory, but we don't necessarily have a lot of evidence long-term that this tends to play out in the way that Holland suggests that it does. So I'm curious for you to take a moment and consider, what do you see as the positive and negative considerations in using the Holland model? And in the module items for this week, you'll see an example case, and it's an opportunity to work through the model and see what that might look like when you're talking about a client and their career situation. All of this leads to the strong interest inventory. So the strong interest inventory is an assessment that's based in the Holland model. And the outcomes of the strong interest inventory represent that RIASEC code. So it represents the 3 letters that would be a part of that Holland taxonomy. And there's some links in the module with examples of a strong interest inventory readout. I encourage you to take a look at that. And thinking about, because when we use assessments, we have to use them responsibly, how would you explain to the client why you're using this assessment? And how would you interpret and talk them through the outcomes? So with a strong interest inventory, which the ONET interest profiler online is a free version of a strong interest inventory that you could use in your peer counseling assignment, thinking about how to explain that to the client and how to incorporate it in. So with this, we want to use the results as a launch pad for discussion rather than something that's prescriptive. So using those good basic counseling skills, you want to be reflective, ask questions about how the client reacts to the outcomes of the strong, if they feel like it fits for them, if it feels like it matches up. And you want to connect the strong interest inventory outcomes to their goals of career counseling. So we're not just going to use it randomly, we're going to use it with intention to help them with their goals, because maybe their goal is like, I want to know if I should stay in this career field. Well, let's see if there's congruence between your personality type and the career field that you're in. And we also want to give it time. So we shouldn't speed through interpretation or just hand someone a readout. It's important to take time to sit down, to walk them through it, and to help making meaningful for the client. So we're looking at the consistency, differentiation of the types, and then we're looking for congruence and knowledge about how their career opportunities may or may not align with their own personality types. So if you're curious to know what your RIASEC code is, I encourage you to go use the ONET Interest Profiler online and take it yourself. See what your outcomes are and see if they line up for you and they match up to your choice to go into a career field that involves counseling, right? Because when we finish up a career assessment session, we want to have some sort of action step after that. So asking the client, what do you think you might do with this information? What are your thoughts about next steps? That way it feels meaningful and the outcome has some connection to next steps and goals. It's not just talking through like, here's this interesting information, and then the session's over. So consider going and taking the strong interest inventory yourself to help understand the Holland code a little bit better and to learn a little bit about yourself in a career context.